There are obvious mistakes you can make to quote-unquote brick your account, like accidentally using 5-star Lycons as XP, trashing your plus 15 relic with 4 rolls in speed, or not pulling X support for Y unit. I won't be talking about those, as 1, you shouldn't realistically be making these type of mistakes unless something very unfortunate happens, 2, they're obvious, and 3, they technically aren't even permanent, as with enough time, patience, and money, you could theoretically get that Lycone, that relic, or character back. Case in point, Ratio's rerun. I'm unsure about fake collab units though. But there are also truly permanent changes that you can make to your account that should, by all rights, be strict upgrades, and usually are, but can also end up nerfing or ruining certain specific synergies and rotations, kinda like this game's version of C6 and Bennett. I'll be talking about those type of upgrades today, and which synergies they can potentially ruin. As a disclaimer, if you have already done any of the things mentioned in the video, I wouldn't really worry about it. The interactions I'll be going over are so niche that they shouldn't matter to 99.999% of players. I just thought I'd talk about them since I personally find them pretty interesting, and they do present a valid case for being able to do things like disable traces and Eidolons. Anyways, the first of these changes is leveling your minor traces. With the release of the Poic Relic set, which can give up to a whopping 32% crit rate if a character is slower than 95 speed in the character select screen after the set's 8% speed nerf, the ability of a character to be slow has suddenly become much more valuable. As such, unlocking a character's speed traces can be detrimental if it causes them to be too fast to unlock this bonus. Luckily, only 2 characters are in the position of being slow enough to unlock this bonus without their speed traces, but too fast with all of their speed traces, the Herta and Jing Liu. Also, before anyone asks, you can unlock the rest of the minor traces and still be under 95 speed without sacrificing any damage traces. That being said, Jing Liu doesn't really care since she usually wants to run a faster 133.4 speed setup with Rania or Sunday anyways. The Herta, on the other hand, does potentially care about Poet's massive crit value since she has no need for speed due to her allies being able to charge her ult, which grants her an immediate turn. With that said, if running additional sources of speed or action advance, Poet can make it harder to hit key breakpoints, since 95 speed after 224 advance forwards from S5 DDD only lets the Herta reach effective 125 speed, which is short of the 134 speed breakpoint. And by hitting 118 speed with the 35% advance forward with her enhanced skill from her E2, the Herta is able to effectively hit 160 speed across 2 cycles, a breakpoint that Poet also ruins. Also, 4P Scholar is a good enough substitution that you're usually better off running it and saving yourself the headache of dodging every speed substat known in existence. When running characters such as Linksha and Castoris, unlocking defense percent traces such as those on Ron Mei can technically be less beneficial, since these characters rely on HP loss for more frequent attacks. However, I have yet to see this difference matter in practice, and in Linksha's case, you can just run +0 headpieces if you really need your characters to be squishier. The final substat to look out for in traces, and honestly the main reason I made this video in the first place, is FRES, specifically on Blade. Being resistant to CC definitely isn't a downside, but having an increased chance to resist DOTs definitely is. Considering that he usually runs with the cleanser like Sunday or Bronya anyways, that also happens to double his actions, this makes having FRES on him actively detrimental most of the time, as he wants as many dots as possible to stick onto him to charge his follow-ups. While this is a niche interaction, especially since he only gains 10% FRES from his traces, and being run with a cleanser tends to remove a lot of dots anyways, it does suck that he has traces that are not just useless, but potentially make him worse in isolation. Hopefully Hoyo addresses this in his buffs, perhaps even by removing them altogether and giving him a CC immunity major trait similar to Maide's. Side note, it's funny how Pollux's unremovable dot, which Blade loves, is literally called Hasten Death. Plus 5 points for lore accuracy. There is also the somewhat infamous Kill Mem strat, which relies on an RMC with an unleveled talent and sometimes skill to make it easier for Mem to die and proc RMC's 25% action advance. While the prospect of an eagle's worth of action advance makes the strategy enticing, getting Mem specifically to be targeted and die on a team with 5+ characters is still hard, especially with the sustain. Not to mention that if Mem is above 40% charge, then her death will always be a net loss of charge if the 25% action advance doesn't grant extra turns, and if it does, that threshold only raises to 57.3%. And honestly, in most cases that action advance isn't even necessary anyways. There's also the fact that you want to max this talent in casters and tribute teams regardless, since they scale off the team's max HP, so for some players this niche strategy simply isn't worth the trouble. Besides traces though, another permanent gameplay change you can make for all characters is unlocking their Eidolons. In almost all cases, this should obviously be an upgrade too, but for 2 units, that might not always be the case. The first case is Bronya's E2, specifically for teams that rely on Bronya to advance Sunday. This double Sunday comp relies on Sunday being +1 speed to Bronya, and is best used on hyper carries with summons like Aglaya. However, if you want to enable this +1 speed setup, you need Sunday to start slower than Bronya, which means that Sunday only gets to act once for the first rotation, an issue that E1 and below Bronya teams don't have to worry about. Of course, this is only for the first turn, and done right this comp can also enable an even faster Sunday than normal, so this downside shouldn't matter too much, all things considered. The second case where Eidolons can screw over with gameplay is Gallagher's E6, specifically on teams with Xie Yi. Normally, the 20% weakness break efficiency he gains is a pure positive, and not just because more weakness break efficiency is straight up better. It's also because Gallagher is the only character with a weakness break efficiency buff that isn't a multiple of 50%, letting him deal break damage in weird multiples like 12 and 17. This actually enables some nasty setups, like bringing Hule down to exactly 1 toughness for Boot Hill for maximum screenshot damage. However, these weird multipliers are also exactly what nerfs his synergy with Xie Yi. Since Xie Yi gains 1 karma stack towards the follow-up attacks per 10 toughness she herself reduces, but also gains 1 stack every time an ally reduces toughness, regardless of the amount, it is in her best interest for her allies to reduce as little toughness as possible. To give an example, if non-E6 Gallagher basics a fire weak enemy with 60 toughness, that enemy now has 50 toughness left, letting Xie Yi gain a maximum of 6 stacks. However, if that Gallagher was E6, that enemy would have a total of 48 toughness left instead, only letting Xie Yi gain a maximum of 5 stacks. I'm sure there are also certain break setups that E5 or lower Gallagher can enable for more conventional break DPS that E6 Gallagher can't, but it isn't quite a strict downgrade like E6 Gallagher's synergy with Xie Yi is. And besides traces and Eidolons, the third permanent account upgrade that can't be taken back is superimposing your Herta shop light cones. Now, normally, there's no reason you wouldn't just S5 them right away. After all, it's just free stats. However, the new Remembrance Light Cone, Memory's Curtain Never Falls, has both extra damage and, more importantly, more speed attached to its superimpositions. If you remember from earlier, characters that want to run Poet also run from speed like the plague, and there is one Remembrance character who absolutely wants to run Poet at all costs. That character, of course, is Casterus. At S3 or higher, the Herta Shop Light Cone gives too much speed for her to successfully trigger Poet's condition, and there is actually a small incentive to keep it, since the 8 to 10% damage boost it provides makes it marginally better than all the other Light Cones with 1058 base HP. So if that's the case, then why haven't Guidemakers said anything about it being a free-to-play option for Casterus, especially since there's so many complaints about how she basically needs her S1? Well, if I had to guess, there's a few valid reasons for that. Firstly, not everyone has a low superimposition Memory's Curtain lying around. In fact, some people might have already maxed theirs S5, myself included, preventing it from ever working with Casterus. And if you're still planning to use it, well, there's the problem of needing to dodge speed substats like the Matrix that I mentioned earlier. Second, it still loses out to Lycons with higher base HP than 1058, like Bailu's, Blaze, and, if you're really crazy, Mighty's S1. And third, the extra base HP compared to Victory in a Blink makes Memory's Curtain a better fit for RMC and potentially Hyacine on the team anyways, since they can actually run it at S5 with no drawbacks, providing a higher amount of personal speed and team-wide damage boost, plus healing from speed in Hyacine's case. It's better to just slap it on them and have casters run a different 1058 base HP Lycon instead, like post-op Conversation. And that's all I got. Some honorable mentions include raising your equilibrium level too fast, as that can technically hinder progression for new players, as well as leveling important light cones versus a recent Pollux fight. However, despite these changes being more relevant for most players, they don't fit the strict definition of being permanent breaks, since having a lower equilibrium level is a temporary benefit. Also, casual mode exists for boss fights, and you theoretically could pull another copy of the needed low-level light cone in question for future MOC rotation outside of a Herta shaft copy. Though realistically it's way more practical to run +0 headpieces or non-tank main stat relics to lower HP and defense instead. With that said, are there any other permanent account bricks I missed? Feel free to let me know in the comments if I did. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and see you next time.